Well, we are going to turn our attention to another critically important issue. I guess that's U.S.-Mexico relations might be the best way to frame that, but there's a lot to get to here. So lucky for us, we have Zoe Alexandra, the editor of People's Dispatch, that is all over everything happening in Mexico and just about every other country. Zoe, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, great to have you here. Between the time you agreed to come on and the time we've gone on air, a lot has changed in this story. Of course, Donald Trump has not only walked back for, I think, about a month the tariffs on Mexico, but even sharing some positive words about President Claudia Sheinbaum after a number of months in a State of the Union just bashing Mexico. So maybe the first question I would ask you here is, what is the state of play? Like what have the two sides agreed to, if anything, or is it a prolongation of negotiations, or where are we at on the 25%, I believe, tariffs on Mexico?
Yeah, so, we had initially the tariffs were actually set to take effect against Mexico in February, early February, but there was that round of negotiations and talks between Claudia Sheinbaum and Donald Trump that got it pushed back to March. And now, once again, at 11 a.m. Mexico time, Claudia Sheinbaum, Donald Trump both announced that this would be pushed back to April. Yeah, this essentially they reached agreement under the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement, that anything kind of that's encapsulated in this agreement will not they will not be required to pay tariffs on this. Yesterday also they had suspended the tariffs on the auto industry. So I think what we're looking at is that on April 2nd, when Donald Trump does the comprehensive review on kind of these reciprocal tariffs, which is not just targeting, he made his kind of like initial targets to be Mexico, Canada, and China, talking specifically about like the fentanyl problem. Now he's pushing back for both, and Canada actually was just announced now as well, is also gonna have that kind of 1 month reprieve. It will be evaluated as part of the reciprocal tariff evaluation. And of course, the US and Mexico have extensive commercial agreements, extensive free trade agreements. So it's unlikely that they will be super impacted by the reciprocal tariffs. So, it is kind of a wait and see, and anything could happen in the next month. But for now, they were able to kind of fend off what were sort of like punishment tariffs, not really based on reality, not really based on kind of, it was the excuse was fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl. Of course, there's kind of this deeper issue of kind of the impact of globalization and factories moving to Mexico, which was kind of part of the approach. Now it's just going to be lumped in with the general, let's make the rules fairer for the biggest and richest economy in the world.
Zoe, it's pretty impressive. Claudia Sheinbaum has been in office for not very long. And she's already had to deal with a change in administration to her north, the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America, under a presidency that was trying to punish Mexico with these tariffs, and has also added Mexican drug cartels to the foreign terrorist organization list, essentially doing what Elon Musk openly said, which is laying the groundwork for being able to carry out drone strikes in Mexico, which is a huge threat. So, can you put, I don't know, some of these acts of, I would say, aggression by the United States in the context of Claudia Sheinbaum as president and and the movement she represents and what that means to the U.S. Because there's a reason that they're attacking Mexico. I'm not trying to put this, say the tariffs are the reason for this, because obviously Canada is being subjected to potential tariffs as well. But there does seem to be a heightened aggression towards Mexico.
Yeah, it is actually very, very concerning. And while there is definitely room for celebration about the tariffs announcement, if you listen to Trump's State of the Union, this week, there was definitely his address to Congress. He once again kind of reiterated what you mentioned, Rania, which is, in a way threatening the use of force to go after Mexican drug cartels, not only in US territory, but in Mexican territory. And again, this opens up an entirely new kind of scenario and threat. It's something that a lot of analysts have been warning about with the designation of these organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, because essentially this designation just gives gives powers to the US government to go after them in a certain way that, again, they're threatening doing drone strikes across the border, threatening the use of military force. There's already been kind of this militarization of the border. So all of this is very concerning. And again, despite the relief on tariffs, again, Trump did mention in this address to Congress, kind of this, we will go after these organizations, we will kind of crack down. Um, and that is definitely concerning. And Mexico has continued to maintain this position that they are doing everything they can, on in the area that concerns them, which is again continuing this very, very difficult and long war on drug cartels in the country, which again, if we just look a little bit into the past, which have been propped up by past administrations that were directly collaborating with the United States, backed by the United States, receiving support from the United States. So, important to just add that element that Mexican governments like of Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderon, there are cases against members of those members of their administrations for having links to drug cartels. And so now there's this, oh, we're going to go after the drug cartels. At the same time, in Mexico, there's a narrative that, oh, the administration of Morena is working with the cartels. And so it is, in some senses, of course, there actually is a very real struggle going on in Mexico to actually crack down on organized crime, which once again has been bolstered and in many ways supported by the right wing in the country. Of course, the left and progressive movements do not want huge criminal organizations to exist in the country, but also the attack and this kind of like, we're going to go after the US and the right wing. Look, Morena's with the cartels. This is also sort of a smokescreen to attack a government that is attempting to rebuild Mexico's sovereignty, to give a prosperous life to the people, and is challenging importantly, some of those vested US interests in Mexico.
It's a number of good points there. Sorry, I got distracted when you mentioned Vicente Fox, who put out this video denouncing Claudia Sheinbaum. It looked like a hostage video. It looked ridiculous. But I thought the point you ended on is very important, which is the sort of what the fourth transformation is doing. I mean, a little bit before this, and like I told people at the top, I was sick, so maybe I misread the graph, but I think I'm right. Since the USMCA has been signed, which of course AMLO, the predecessor of Claudia Sheinbaum, negotiated during the first Trump administration, contrary maybe to popular belief, in the auto parts sector in the United States, the employment in the US has gone up at the same time, actually, that the Mexican industry has boomed. But I'm saying not to say is the idea that somehow US Mexico cooperation is inherently undermining all workers seems, a little put to the side by that. And when you look at what they've been talking about, the second floor, the fourth transformation, I mean, it seems like they're trying to raise the incomes and raise the living standards of Mexican people. And I feel like so much of this is trying to pit working people in America against working people in Mexico, as if there's not a possibility for shared cooperation around similar goals on both sides of the border, I think, for workers to improve their livelihood.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of the kind of rhetoric and narrative around industry leaving the United States and going to Mexico relies on the fact that these previous governments, these conservative governments, were also kind of complicit in lowering the standards of work, lowering the safety standards, and allowing it to be profitable to have their companies located in Mexico, not just because of maybe parts or certain other things being cheaper, but also the labor itself being cheaper. And precisely part of Morena's fourth transformation has also been to, I mean, one of the major things is to increase wages. The wage discrepancy, of course, between the United States and Mexico is massive. if you're working in a automobile plant in Mexico, you're definitely making way less than you would in the United States. But whose fault is that? It's not the Mexican worker. Uh, it's of course the companies that are trying to exploit this labor. So I think this also brings out really important discussions and debates. Of course, there's a history and a legacy of the impact of deindustrialization on the U.S. working class that cannot be kind of erased. But I think that this moment is opening up important dialogues and opportunities to actually be able to identify who is at fault. And as the Mexican government is trying to actually hold those companies accountable, demanding that standards be raised, demanding that Mexican workers are treated with dignity, it is a good opportunity to not kind of engage in this, oh, well, these workers are scabs. They're actually also trying to make a living and trying to survive in this environment. And of course, it is these companies which have benefited from this scheme, which are to blame. So I think it's important. There's a lot we can learn from the model of the fourth transformation, not only with regards to workers' rights and benefits, but the idea that Mexican resources can be used to the benefit of Mexican people. One of the main pillars of the fourth transformation is also energy sovereignty, using Mexican resources, trying to make the country completely dependent on their own resources. In the press conference today, Claudia Sheinbaum mentioned for many years, because of different commercial agreements, Mexico was importing fuel, was importing energy when they actually have so many resources. And so turning that around, I think that this model of fourth transformation can really serve it as an inspiration, even in terms of, women's rights. There's so many advances that have happened in Mexico, a country that faces, an epidemic of femicides and a lot of misogynist violence. This government, Claudia Sheinbaum, the current mayor of Mexico City, the head of government of Mexico City, Clara Brujada, taking very strong positions, in a moment when Donald Trump administration is cracking down on women's rights. Just the south of the border, we see a really interesting example of public policies being put in place to actually help women workers, to create centers where women are able to exchange and to collectivize, for example, reproductive labor. Really interesting things. So I think these, in moments like these where we see kind of this attempt to pit workers against each other, as you said, Eugene, there's also a really interesting opportunity for exchange and building together and learning from these examples.
Zoe, I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about how Claudia Sheinbaum is navigating Mexico foreign policy, which obviously involves the U.S., but also the rest of the region. And I know it's a really, really big question, but would you describe the foreign policy of Mexico under Morena, under Claudia Sheinbaum, as anti-imperialist?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting moment because a lot of what's dominating Latin America and the Caribbean right now in terms of their foreign policy is the response to Donald Trump and this incoming U.S. administration, which, as we know in the United States, it's completely shaken up a lot of what was happening in the past several years. I mean, you only have to look at Russia and Ukraine to know that the entire world kind of map is not the map, but the situation is really being radically changed. And so it's interesting. A lot of people, there was a lot of doubts about Claudia Sheinbaum before she was elected, saying, "Oh, is she going to just kind of be a technocrat? Is she going to just, turn on this project of transformation? Is she going to be kind of turn her back on the left?" And what's interesting is that even in the face of a lot of attacks from the United States, she and her administration have continued to stand up in support of Cuba, has continued to stand up, for example, in defense of Pedro Castillo, who's currently going through trial right now in Peru, accused of rebellion, accused of many other things, having been taken out in the coup d'etat in December 2022. So despite actually facing these very, very aggressive attacks on the country, she is still kind of maintaining this position of Mexico standing in defense other countries. I would say anti-imperialism, perhaps a little far. I think that would be a stone too
Sorry, my
far,
wishful
but
thinking.
wishful thinking and really not in the Mexican tradition. I think what's interesting is that Morena is really carrying the torch in terms of Mexico's historic role in the region as being one of non-intervention, this idea of Mexican humanism, and also kind of maintaining, it's a country, for example, where for a century exiles from across Latin America have gone to. I mean, even Leon Trotsky went to Mexico. It's this place that holds this role in the region of supporting the region. So anti-imperialism, not yet. I think until there's anti-imperialist movement in charge of the government, that would be a stretch.
Indeed. Although it was pretty cool to see the Mexican Congress come out for Western Sahara very strongly the other day when I guess the King of Morocco had some envoy there. Well, I have a little surprise for you guys. If we could bring up the photo just to remind people of some past work People's Dispatch and Breakthrough News have done on the issue of Mexico with President Claudia Sheinbaum. Wow, you took it off in 2 seconds, less than a second.
Yeah,
I'm trying to show
wow.
the
They wanted to
audience how we
remind
were
us
ahead
and
of the
then make us
curve
forget.
here, and we've just been taken off. Well, what can you do? Oh wow, there's now a fire truck in my ear. Long story short,
Oh,
once this whole
he muted himself because of the fire truck.
Oh
Wow, I
shit.
guess it's
the
really
audience has to
loud.
forgive me. It was too much. It was too much mentally.
Wow, we can't
But
hear
I
it
just
if
want to
that
say,
helps. We can't hear it.
just for my own sake, if I said something stupid, but after this whole show is over, I really do hope people get a chance to check out the interview that Zoe. There we go. Zoe and Rania were able to do with Claudia Sheinbaum before she became president, but I think touching on a number of critically important issues that are coming to play now, and of course we do thank the president for giving us that access during her campaign when she was very busy, but very exciting, very cool. Look at that. I mean, I know you're from the United States, Zoe, but you have some ties to Canada. So we're uniting all three countries here: Mexico, Canada, United
Oh,
States. We're
that's a
bringing
good
everybody
point.
together and around the right issues, not the wrong issues. We're bringing them all together. But, as always, Zoe, we really appreciate you. People's Dispatch has been writing a lot about this. You're constantly covering it and just, again, every other country on earth. So if you're not following People's Dispatch, I don't know what you're doing. Zoe Alexandra, editor of People's Dispatch, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.